Hello, and welcome to Unsheathed with your hosts, Kyell Gold and Cam Hirosaki. We hope that you enjoy the program. Please stick around afterwards. There'll be cake and blowjobs.
Hi, welcome to Unsheathed number 45. I'm Kyell Gold.
I'm Cam Hirosaki.
And I'm foozzzball.
Yay, welcome foozzzball.
Mm-hmm.
Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All the way from Bogoslovenia.
Yes. In the topmost turret of his isolated castle in the wilderness.
Yes.
We're here, we brought foozzzball on the show because we're going to do an entire show dedicated to editing 3 paragraphs that one listener sent us.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the editing process, and hopefully all our listeners will learn a little bit about how we go through and edit and try to make our prose better once we've written down the first draft.
And also just the general concept of being able to look at your own work and how to determine what needs to be changed or adjusted.
But first, World Cup commiseration.
Yes.
As the New York Post said over the picture of Landon Donovan, it's a stupid game anyway. Who wants to be in the semifinals?
I'm pulling for the 2 European teams myself. Oh, no, there's 3. There's 3. I forgot that Spain is Europe, too.
It's like an all-Europe semifinals, almost.
Except for Uruguay.
I'm kind of pulling for Uruguay. They invented soccer, apparently.
Yeah, but
they kind of sound like somebody saying you're a gay.
Yes.
But Uruguay also crushed Ghana's hopes and dreams with, like, the most bullshit end of a game ever.
Yeah, but Ghana crushed our hopes and dreams.
Oh, yeah. Screw Ghana. Stupid game anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, who wants to be in the semifinals anyway?
We'll just start our own soccer league with blackjacks and hookers.
Well, at least we've always got basketball.
Yes.
We don't.
If you can't tell, we're all quite excited to have Futurama back as well.
Yes, we are.
We're all waiting for our iPhones.
Yeah, once the installation was done, I think it would actually be pretty cool to have that.
Yeah. But I can kind of think of a lot of things about which that's true that I wouldn't really want to go through the installation procedure for.
Yeah.
My phone is old. I have a very old phone. It just calls people. It doesn't really do anything else.
See, it's funny because I don't know,
Did you know these things were phones too?
Yeah. That was the one moment that really cracked me up because we have these smartphones and I send text messages and instant messages and Twitters and tweets and Facebooks and whatnot. And I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes people can call me on it too. It's kind of funny how it works. But we're here to do a little bit of editing. So the way this is going to work, and this is just me at the beginning of the show. I make no guarantees as to how it will go beyond the first couple minutes. But so the way this is going to work, I'm going to read the piece as Condrel sent it to us, and then foozzzball is going to tear it to shreds, and Hirosaki and I are going to attempt to not allow it to completely expire.
Captain Hacksaw.
Yes.
The lesser-known cousin of Captain Hammer. The hacksaw is not your penis. I certainly hope it's not.
Wow.
One would.
One would hope.
Like one does.
But
yes.
Then what we're going to try to do is come up with at least some kind of text to recommend as the final text. And a lot of this, so Condrel sent us an excerpt, which was, he introduces it as saying, this is coming close to the beginning of the second chapter. This is a description of the tribe lands where our intrepid adventurers will next need to infiltrate. That's all the context he gave us for the piece. And here is the piece itself. People from outside the tribe lands feared its sharp angles and perilous heights, deadly jungles with creatures only whispered about since prehistoric times, and endless plains with not a drop of exposed water to be found. They avoided it like a black mark on the maps, merchants and traders making 1,000-mile detours around its perimeter. At least one civilization, near the northern rim, had made a practice of banishing unwanteds into the tribe lands with 3 days' worth of food and water, a knife, and their wits to accompany them. People from inside the tribe lands feared the outside world as desperately as the foreigners feared the tribes. Layered in generations of ritual and ceremony, their terror of the outside world was enshrined in their beads and feathers and the dances they danced around the fires at night, like the one that looked like a chicken but was supposed to be an eagle. They worshipped everything within their microcosm of the world just as fervently as they didn't worship anything from the outside. At least one tribe, who lived along the northern face of the labyrinth, thought that the sun and moon shone only on the tribe lands, and every once in a while a poor untutored soul would wander in from the outside with 3 days' worth of food and water, a knife, and a dazzled look on their face like they were seeing the sun and moon for the first time. The tribe would take them in, nurture them, teach them the stories of Father Sun and Daughter Moon, then free their soul to fly with the stars, who also shone only on the tribe lands, by throwing them bodily from the top of a special plateau. If the outside world and inside tribes ever bothered to meet, they would agree on only one thing, and that would be that they should never meet again. So there we go.
And that is our 3 paragraphs.
That is our 3 paragraphs. So why don't we all go around and kind of talk about our initial evaluation, and then we can go through line by line and see what we'd change and what we'd leave in.
Okay.
Okay.
Hirosaki, why don't you start, and then we'll let foozzzball tear it up, and then I'll conclude.
Okay. I think it's very evocative. I get a good sense of place, which is good because that's effectively what it's a description of. I get sort of a mental image of, what's going on here, but a lot of it is my brain sort of filling in details based on things I already know about similar things and not so much about what's being said in the actual text. It gets a little close to info dumpy, but not super egregiously. I think the fact that it's only like 3 paragraphs is okay. If it went on much longer than this, I would say like, okay, yeah, we're going to get back to the story now. But not having context for the story itself, it's kind of hard to say how much of a detour of narrative this actually is. I think on the whole, there's a lot of long sentences, and at least the first 2 paragraphs are fairly long themselves. I think that's something that I think could certainly be made a bit more brisk so that it's not feeling like you're reading something out of like a history textbook or something. But on the whole, I think a lot of what could be worked on is mostly just terms of phrasing and, the actual wording itself and not necessarily the content. I think most of what's actually being conveyed is fine. It's just the, way that it is being conveyed. All right.
Fooz?
I'm sort of like listening to Hirosaki, and my eyes are wide, but they can't see that because, to me, I see huge problems with this thing. Structurally, it's 2 very large paragraphs followed by a 3rd single-sentence paragraph, and sometimes you can get away with that, especially if you've got a strong point to make in your 3rd paragraph. But the 3rd paragraph here is, if the outside world and inside tribes ever bothered to meet, they would only agree on one thing, and that would be that they should never meet again. This isn't really a particularly strong thought. It's not really, a hammer blow to sort of, solidify what has just been said. So, structurally, I have a problem with it. I have a problem with a lot of its phrasing. I can sort of dig into each of the sentences and complain about them, but I think that's a little too much in depth right now. Stuff like the geography espoused, sort of like, okay, there's endless plains and, what is it, mountains and endless plains and lacking water, and then they could sort of take a detour around it of 1,000 miles. 500 miles is not that huge geographically. I can go on and on and on and on and on. It's muddy. It doesn't really sort of have a clear direction. It wants to have a clear direction, but it doesn't quite go in any direction, I feel.
All right. I kind of think my evaluation sort of falls in between the two of you, which is interesting. I think it's the tone that he's trying for. I got. My question was, without the context of the rest of the book, I'm not sure if he's trying for a kind of lighter fantasy or if he's trying for a real suspenseful adventure. There's a bunch of stuff with the phrasing which we can go into in a little more detail after this. I like the fact that he tries to add the humor in. I think it could be carried out a little better. And I actually kind of question the necessity and construction of the entire second paragraph. And I'm looking at this from a tension within narrative kind of point of view. Because the only context we have is our intrepid adventurers have to cross these tribe lands next.
Yeah.
Infiltrate them.
Right. And so it feels like what he wants these paragraphs to do is build up how dangerous the tribe lands are, how much tension is going to be in the story, because these people are going into these terrible lands that merchants and traders go days out of their way to avoid, that people use as a prison colony or a punishment for, wrongdoers in their lands and all that. And then you kind of give us this second paragraph which tells us all about the people that they're about to meet. And immediately, the more you know about it, the less tension there is in the story. And I would rather see, the first paragraph. I have some suggestions about reconstructing it so that it's not quite as, it's more showy and less telly. But I would rather see the second paragraph be all the hearsay about the people inside the tribe lands, what the outer people had heard about them, what was read, and I will agree with Foozz that the last paragraph feels like it's constructed to be a punchline of a joke, or from the content, it looks like it's supposed to be a punchline of a joke, but it feels like this is the end of a Douglas Adams piece, but without as much wackiness.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to be a little bit Douglas Adams with his fantasy, and I think you need to commit one way or the other. It either needs to be a tense adventure story, or it needs to be like, well, the outer people all feared the people of the tribe lands, even though the people of the tribe lands dressed like chickens and worshipped posters of puppies hanging off branches,
Yeah.
So that is...
Motivational posters?
Yes.
Or just generic posters with puppies?
I was thinking the motivational posters, but that's because I just saw one recently.
If I can...
but that was my evaluation of it, and we can go around and discuss a little bit now and talk about some of the more specific suggestions we have.
So my first big thing is, again, only kind of knowing the context. As far as how much information you're going to even be putting in here, my big question is, how much of this can the reader not learn by these characters actually going into the tribe lands themselves? In almost any case, you're better off getting the details as part of the action as opposed to outside of it to sort of prep you for it. And if this is where the characters are immediately going, then, we can see what these places are like, through their eyes, or, even like through dialogue of, characters bandying about, oh, this is what I've heard, and sort of, trying to sort out the hearsay from the facts. This here, especially the second paragraph, everything is presented factually in sort of that Douglas Adamsy way, where you take the author's word for it that this is being stated as, true, and not, this is a very, very loose, omniscient viewpoint that's not centered in anything. It's sort of just looking at like the world and sort of saying, okay, this is what this is like. And I agree with Kyell that does sort of take a lot of the tension and mystery out of things. And so that's sort of outside the scope of actually editing these paragraphs. That's more of a, how much do I want to put in here at all question. So,
but I think it's part of it.
It is part of it.
I think because when you go through and edit, part of it is saying, okay, I've put this section in so that the reader knows what the adventurers are going into.
Right.
But is that something that I want to present at this point?
Exactly. And that's why I'm saying that up front rather than as part of, oh, you should definitely change this because you don't want to say it here. I'm saying that the author needs to look at this in context, which I don't have. So it's up to sort of the author to say, okay, well, where in the course of the story itself can I put this in a more active and engaging way? If that makes sense. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It's a little difficult for us because this whole little section doesn't actually have any characters appearing in it. It's purely that, third-person omniscient, descriptive material.
Right. And so, we could take the tack of saying, well, let's assume that it's just a nice little descriptive introduction to the chapter, and that, he does need a little bit of descriptive introduction there. But that said, I still kind of question I still kind of question the need for the second paragraph or the need for it as is. So, Foozz, you mentioned you see where he's trying to go with it. Can you talk a little more about it?
Yeah. If you sort of look at the first paragraph, he's sort of going, okay, here's this, big, scary place. And then, the second paragraph is, again, they sort of, they're sort of closer to us, they sort of more personal. They sort of have, a dance that, is meant to look like an eagle, but it looks like a chicken. And, it's sort of very humanizing. But it's still very, very threatening because suddenly they sort of take people in, nurture them, and sort of randomly chuck them off a plateau. So, it's sort of trying to build up this threat, but this very sort of, well, not exactly a known threat. I almost want to say that this guy's going to follow it up with, something from the perspective of one of the tribes members, or have them meet a tribes member or something, and he's sort of trying to get them humanized ahead of that. But, it's definitely taking a threatening edge.
Right. And I think he's trying to, and that's what kind of makes me feel like he wanted to create a little bit of tension because the adventurers are going into this place, but at the same time, the second paragraph feels to me like it's telling you what's going to happen to the adventurers before you find out.
It's setting up an expectation, and I think if he breaks that expectation, then he's perfectly legitimate to set up expectations. But if he's going to play it straight, you should just play it straight. Right,
because my point that I was sort of making is this doesn't look like it's setting up for expectation breaking, because it is stated as fact, and that sort of lends itself to the thought that, well, if this is what things are like, then this is what they're going to run into, not this is what they've heard things are like, and what they run into is something different. Like, that's not how this is presented.
Right. And I think it would be fun to have, I actually like the idea of having the characters talk back and forth about how, I heard in the Tribelands that there's, people who, if the children don't pass their rites of adulthood, they slaughter them and eat them at the feast or something. I heard that if they see an outsider from 2 miles away, they can put an arrow through his eye socket.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And then they get in and they're, worshiping motivational puppy posters and dancing around in chicken feathers, and they're all, very pleasant people.
And then they're put inside of a wicker man.
No wicker.
Yeah, wicker is bad stuff, particularly when you ask artists to draw wicker. Oh, it's very complex to draw.
Yeah, the original Wicker Man is a great movie.
I think looking at this, on the one hand, we can say that, okay, it would be better if we do it through dialogue, but I think that's a style that we three have. I don't know if it's necessarily valid for us to sort of attack this by going, okay, we would have done it differently from the beginning.
That's true. But I do think, you could do the second paragraph without dialogue and just say, some of the legends told were blah. In the northern city of Kalakabir, they said that the Tribelands were home to a race of half muskrat, half human creatures that, sacrificed animals to their pagan god. And on the Eastern Rim, the city of blah, blah, blah thought that the tribes people were all, bloodthirsty Scrabble players who killed their opponent on a triple word score. And
Extreme Scrabble.
Have you and Kit been playing Scrabble, and are you sore about it or something?
no. Kit and I don't play Scrabble.
That's not why he's sore. And I'm out for the podcast. See you guys next week.
You otters with your paws and your innuendos.
I'm not biting that. I'm not taking that bait. Sorry.
I think when you mentioned the rooms, are you going to take that bait?
I'm not taking any bait.
So you're not going to take a bait of room, okay. When you mentioned the rooms, the northern room, the eastern room, I find that kind of strange in relation to how variable these tribe lands are, because it's sharp angles, it's perilous heights, it's deadly jungles, it's endless plains. This doesn't sound like an area with a very definitive border.
Yeah.
That's true.
Although there seems to be a perimeter, and, he mentions the northern rim, and
The detour.
I mean, maybe the outside people built a big fence.
Yeah.
And they have patrols, like amateur militia patrols around the fence. Sorry, little Arizona humor there.
I was going to say, that you're getting close to the perimeter of the tribe lands when Danielle Rousseau comes out of the woods with her rifle and says cryptic things.
I think there's a need for internal consistency with this piece already. It's not just that; it's also, if you look at this, okay, the tribe will take them in, nurture them, teach them the stories of Father, Son, and Daughter Moon, and then kill them. Granted that that sounds brutal, but they're sort of trained not to believe in anything that exists from the outside. Why are they taking the time to sort of take them in, nurture them, teach them the stories? That doesn't strike me as particularly brutal against outsiders, even though they kill them in the end.
Right. And I think that was mostly, it feels like that was put in there for the humor value, where
Maybe.
it was kind of like, he was trying to do a double back, where he said, these tribes people are all feared
Nice
and brutal and everything,
wonderful.
and then a stranger wanders in, and they take care of them and nurture them, and they teach them their stories, and they accept them as part of their community, and then they throw them off a plateau and kill them.
Thud.
Haha. Gotcha. Fool me once? Nah, never mind. So, yeah.
That is possible, but
Again, I agree. It's not.
It's not wholly consistent, and even that
Right.
change in tone sort of erodes consistency, even though that's eroding the narrative consistency rather than the internal consistency.
Right, and it's not, it's kind of too quickly done. Like you change over and then you change back all within a single sentence, and it's you kind of probably want to spend a little more time on that. So just I went through like at least the first paragraph, and then I got distracted by thinking about, well, do you want to write the second paragraph at all? But one of the things that I did specifically want to point out that kind of goes with our show and telling thing is when he says, people from outside the tribe lands feared its sharp angles and perilous heights, blah, blah, blah. And that construction there, I want to read sort of an alternate sentence to that. Legend said the tribe lands were nothing but dark jungles, treacherous cliffs, and forbidding deserts. And the difference in that second one is you're not telling the reader how people feel about it.
Yeah.
You're telling the reader what the legends are, and then the more you build it up, the more you can infer how the people from outside felt about it, because you're trying to create that impression with your reader, instead of saying flat out, people from the outside feared the tribe lands because of
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Also, as written, I will admit that I actually had to read it a couple of times before I parsed it correctly.
And that first sentence, I think, is too long.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure.
I think another element is that the moment that you say people from outside the tribe lands, that sort of immediately sort of throws you out of the narrative. When you sort of do it as a legend, you're much more into it. You can sort of, be more emotively sympathetic with the fear, because suddenly it's your fear as you read about this scary thing.
Right.
Yeah, because now you're relating directly to the reader and not just to this nebulous people.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you say, these people felt this, as you say, you're putting the reader at a distance from those people and from the events of the narrative itself. I think I just repeated what you guys both said.
Maybe more concisely.
I was going to say more succinctly.
We are editing each other, so...
Yes. And so, that first sentence, I'll read it again. People from outside the tribe lands feared its sharp angles and perilous heights, deadly jungles with creatures only whispered about since prehistoric times, and endless plains with not a drop of exposed water to be found. So, plains with not a drop of exposed water to be found, you could just turn into the word deserts.
Yeah.
Well, you can get plains with no exposed water, but that's related to very strange water table things. I think my main issue is that you've suddenly got jungles which suddenly become plains. There's vast transitory spaces required to do that.
Right. And my other question, apart from that, the creatures only whispered about since prehistoric times. Again, these kind of descriptive phrases that are dropped into this sentence are a little long to be in an introductory sentence. And lastly, I'm kind of wondering what sharp angles are a geographic feature that people would be scared of.
Unless we're talking about mountains. Some Lovecraftian city.
I know.
With its
like
non-Euclidean
angles.
Yes. And its cyclopean structures. Yeah.
So sharp angles it's one of those examples of things that I've talked about, I think from time to time, maybe not on the podcast, but words that sound good when you're writing them and they have the right tone and they convey the feel that you want, but when you go back and look at them, they don't actually mean the right thing.
Yeah.
And I understand what he's trying to do. Sharp angle it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
It implies corners and points and...
It's flavorful sprinkles, but it's not meat.
Right. And perilous heights is better, but it's still... it just makes me think of... we were talking recently about I haven't looked this up on TV tropes, but I'm sure there's a TV trope about the dangerous, endless cliff.
Yeah.
The cliff face. The movie we were talking about was Van Helsing, which uses the cliff face in the middle of nowhere terribly. But that's what that makes me think of. It's like you'll be, running along in the jungle and, oh no, 2-mile long cliff. So
in the middle of Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
In the middle of Europe.
Yeah.
Not a river at the bottom or anything. But anyway. So sharp angles and perilous heights... I kind of would like to see more specifics there.
Yeah, because honestly, the only thing that comes to mind when I try to think of that is like the hyena territory in The Lion King.
Yeah.
With this weird stylized, like jagged mountain things, which also don't exist in the savannah in Africa, so I don't know why they're there.
Well, there are mountains. Kind of.
Yeah, but
That's
they
Drakensberg.
don't look like
Right.
jaggy little teeth that come out of the middle of nowhere.
The Drakensberg do, but they're not exactly on the savannah.
Exactly.
So this is one of those cases where we talk about the right details, and the details have to be concrete enough that they can produce a good image in the mind of the reader, and they also have to be small and specific enough that they feel real. And I think this is Go ahead.
I will say that there's one good thing about because he's got a progression of details, and he starts off with sharp angles and perilous heights, which sort of imply mountains, and he sort of goes to sort of these cloistered, sort of tangled sounding jungles that are, sort of have invisible creatures in them, and then he sort of moves it out to large open space with endless plains. And I will say I like that progression of concepts, but I think that's just about the only thing that this line has going for it.
And I think you could... With a very little bit of work, I'm not saying you would keep most of the words, but you could take that progression and say something like, and maybe actually this is a place where he could define what the perimeter is. Maybe the perimeter is a mountain range.
Yeah.
And so he said, beyond the sharp angles and treacherous mountain passes, there were rumored to be valleys full of dark, forbidden jungles and prehistoric creatures.
Sleigh stacks and pylons.
Right. And beyond those, forbidden deserts where, the plains went on for days and there was no water and there were cannibal fennecs and whatnot.
What?
Cannibal
So they eat ears.
Cannibal Fennecs would be a great name for a rock band, by the way.
That would be.
We'll get Savern on that.
Yeah. But now the interesting thing is, immediately he follows that up with maps. So it's not this unknown territory. They avoided it like a black mark on the maps, implying... I mean, okay, it's not a factual implication, but I mean, the sort of back of the mind thing, okay, this place is on a map.
Right.
They're talking about merchants and traders avoiding it intentionally, which implies that it is on their maps.
And I think I'd suggested something like, instead of saying merchants and traders avoided it, say something like, the trade routes were diverted around, hundreds of miles out of their way to avoid going through it or something like that.
Also, please say hundreds, don't say 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
It sounds too much like you're trying to be clever. When have you ever heard somebody say, oh, it's 1,000 miles away? Like, nobody ever says that. Don't say that here.
Yeah, the song goes, I will walk 500 miles.
Yes, and I would walk 500 more.
Just to be the man who walked 1,000 miles.
I like the part about Haverin, too, but in that song. Anyway, I also had a question about, they avoided it like a black mark on the maps. What would be a black mark that isn't the tribelands that they would have, like if they spill a lot of ink on their maps, they'd be like, oh, we don't know what's there, we better go around.
Yeah. It should be like, they avoided it because they knew it was dangerous, and their maps told them to avoid it. Like, that's what it should say.
Right. And again, I think I wrote a little suggestion, something, I think I just wrote, the trade routes curved hundreds of miles out of their way to avoid them, I think is all I put there.
I think I might sort of keep the map image, but, sort of have it like, the traders' maps, had nothing there but, intricately drawn, like, threatening dragons and things, but you'd need to take a very different direction descriptively to pull that off.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I like that.
I do too.
You could say the trade routes, it was only visible on the maps it only appeared on the maps as an invisible obstruction around which all the trade routes were drawn, or something like that.
And also, the use of the passive voice there is actually pretty evocative itself, because it sort of like implies this,
That's also very threatening, because suddenly it's all unknown again.
Detachment from having anything to want to do with this place, which I think is good. Suck it, high school English teachers who told you never to use the passive voice.
The passive voice should never be used. R.I.P. William Sapphire.
Now, there's another thing that worries me a bit, which goes, at least one civilization. How many civilizations are there?
Yeah, his use of the word civilization rather than city or city-state or country or nation or even...
it sounds like you're playing Civilization, like on your PC.
Right, or even clan or something like that.
I think clan would be a good thing, but we'd really need to know more about the larger setting to have a meaningful suggestion on how to change that.
Because then you've got like Western civilization versus other kinds of things, but then it's just like, well, if this is only a few hundred miles across, how many differing civilizations are really matching up in this one spot? That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Right, like are the tribelands like the size of Liechtenstein or the size of Mongolia or the size of Africa? I don't.
Poughkeepsie.
I don't have a sense of scale. The size of our living room. There's a mountain over there, and then there's a jungle over here, and then if the 10 feet before the kitchen, there's no water, so you have to be careful.
Yep. I really want to know how you guys got that much square footage.
Magic.
It's a TARDIS house.
It's a TARDIS house. TARDIS bunker.
I think Fuzzball's ears just perked up somewhere. TARDIS house?
Is it a Type 40 TARDIS?
See, all it takes is like 3 words and I'm beyond my Doctor Who knowledge.
Reminds me I have to work on Summerhill.
Right.
What's interesting is the practice of banishing, these people that they don't want into the tribelands, because on the surface that sounds like a cool idea, but but it's a little bit cliche, it's a little bit archetypal, and I think from the sounds of it, it's closer to what I associate with things like, trials by ordeal for initiation. Normally when you banish people, you really throw them out. If you sort of send them somewhere that's like, horrendously tough, normally you expect them to come back tougher than before. So,
yeah.
Or why would you send 3 days worth of food and water with them if you're banishing them as a punishment? It would be just like, get the hell out. Yeah. We don't ever want to see you again.
Yeah, and honestly, it almost sounds more like the people in the tribelands would banish people out of them. People wouldn't banish other folks into them. That just seems kind of a little backwards.
I think, again, and on this one I had a little bit of suggestion. This one is kind of a case of where I thought there was a little too much detail. The whole banishing people with 3 days worth of food and water and a knife and their wits. And I know that, now having read the whole piece, I know that the payoff comes in the second paragraph to that.
Right.
But I still think it's a little, and for the reasons, Foos, that you were saying, I think it's a little inconsistent. And I could see more if a criminal from that civilization chose exile rather than death and said, okay, you can't kill me, I'm going to run away, and I'm going to run into the tribelands where I know nobody's going to follow me.
Which is more interesting in a way, too.
But I had not thought about your idea that the tribelands people would banish their unbelievers to the outside, which also I think is a neat idea.
I will say that the material here could be used for, sort of foreshadowing, like the adventurers come across a skeleton and, the reader sort of needs some contextual clue to know that it's not just some random skeleton that's being dropped in the middle of nowhere.
It's like, they search him and they find, signs of, the culture they're familiar with, like tools or whatnot, like ironworking or whatever. I don't know how advanced the, people outside the tribelands are by comparison.
Well, I will say one thing is you do get a sense from this description of what level of technology, civilization, whatnot. They have merchants, traders, but they don't have a lot of information passing around. So I'm getting, and it also feels like it's not big city worlds. So it feels like it's kind of maybe like Roman Empire level, maybe a little before that.
Yeah, that's sort of the gist I'm getting as well.
Well, I mean, tribes are apparently a significant government system because there are tribe lands. So, yeah, that's reasonable.
Right. Yeah, and I actually had said, how did I rewrite that? The only contact anyone had with the tribelands was when a criminal chose exile rather than death. To the cities that bordered the tribelands, that came to much the same thing. Which is quickly written, but, the idea being, we don't care if you stay here and let us chop your head off, or if you go into the tribelands where no one ever comes back from.
Yeah,
we're quit of you either way.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, sort of analyzing this based on, like the actual information conveyed, we have geographic information, we have threat information, we have information about getting rid of criminals by sending them into the tribelands. There are a lot of ways to format that information without necessarily digging into 3 sentences in one paragraph.
Right. And I might almost think, using the first 2 paragraphs instead of, I kind of see what he's trying to do with, this is what the outside people think, and this is what the inside people think. But I think it would almost be more powerful if it was all from one perspective, and then you're allowed to find out later through the narrative what the differences are.
Right.
Because telling the reader all this information up front, it's not, like you said, it's not really an info dump. It's not that complex. I'm sorry, not that long. But what it does do is it doesn't leave the reader much room to think about things and figure
things out. It front-loads the reader's
expectations.
Right. Is what it does.
It also diffuses the focus, because, I mean, you know, it's not like this whole thing is building up to one moment where, you know, your character is sort of seen being shoved out of their city with food, water, and a knife. You know, it sort of meanders back and forth.
Right. It feels like we're kind of wrapping up with at least the first paragraph. And what do we have for the second one?
I find the word desperately quite strange, because it goes, people from inside the tribe lands feared the outside world as desperately as the foreigners fear the tribes. Desperately is a funny word to use.
Yeah, agreed. It's a little bit awkward there.
Yeah, to fear desperately. That does sound strange.
What I will say is that the first words, you know, people from inside the tribe lands, you know, it's a direct, you know, mirroring of the first paragraph, which is people from outside the tribe lands. And that can be a good effect, but you need to be careful with it. You need to be using it very deliberately if you're going to use it.
That is, parallel construction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a term for you guys.
It's a term for me.
That's what that's called.
Specifically speaking, in the first line, they fear the tribe lands' sharp angles, its perilous heights, its deadly jungles, its creatures, its endless plains, its lack of water. They do not actually mention fearing the tribes.
Right.
So it's as desperately as foreigners fear the tribes. No, the foreigners fear the terrain.
Yeah, as desperately as the foreigners fear the tribe lands.
Yeah.
Or the geographical features and the legends and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because by this point, we don't even know anything about the tribes themselves. And even really at the end of this paragraph, we still don't know a whole lot about them. We know, like, 2 points of factological interest, and that's about it. Neither of which is really terribly salient.
In the second sentence there, they say, their terror of the outside world was enshrined in their beads and feathers and the dances they danced around the fires at night, like the one that looked like a chicken but was supposed to be an eagle.
Yeah, my notes for this particular piece is just like sort of strewed with random question marks.
So again, and I think that's supposed to be a joke, but it feels like he started with one idea at the beginning of that sentence and then ended up with, hey, it would be kind of funny if they danced like an eagle but it looked like a chicken, and it ended up with a joke, because I don't get anything about their terror of the outside world after he says they were afraid of the outside world. After that specific phrase, I don't get anything about that. All he says is they worship their own world, and there's no.
There's also, I was gonna say there's also like a participle issue in the leading clause, or it says layered in generations of ritual and ceremony, their terror of the outside world, like that, like the antecedent there, it makes it sound like their terror is layered in ritual and ceremony.
Yeah,
you see what I mean? Which it can be, but I don't think that's what it means, or I don't think that's what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah,
it needs to sort of be something, you know, like layered in generations of ritual and ceremony. Their terror of the outside world was enshrined in their dark rituals of sacrifice to, you know, blah blah, the god of, you know, the barrier between this world and the outer world, or, you know, whatever. It needs to be enshrined in something, not in beads and feathers and dances. It needs to have a specific instance of something powerful and scary about why they have focused all of their, you know, terror on that.
Right. And I think the construction of that sentence isn't bad, but yeah, the antecedent is a little.
It's awkward because I can't tell if it's intentional or not.
Well, it's awkward because if you turn it around and say their terror of the outside world was layered in generations of ritual and ceremony, I'm not sure what the word layered means. I think that's the one that's maybe reinforced.
Was steeped in generations?
Reinforced or steeped. Yeah, you could. That seems to make a little more sense.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Because I think what he's trying to say is you know, reinforced by generations of ritual and ceremony. In other words, they fear the outside world because all their rituals say the outside world is scary, and they've always done it that way. But then we don't get any specifics about why they think the outside world is scary, or what these rituals are that teach them that the outside world is scary, which would be nice to
like
have.
Dancing like an eagle, like I don't see what that has. The immediate relevance isn't there, and then it's not explained.
maybe it was that, like, people from the outside came and saw their eagle dance and laughed at them because they said it looked like a chicken, and then that's why they're terrified of the outside world, because they're afraid of being made fun of.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was in high school. I know how that feels.
I have done the chicken dance at a wedding, so I can totally relate.
And then, so moving on to the next bit here, it says, they worshipped everything within their microcosm of the world just as fervently as they didn't worship any from the outside. I don't think you can fervently not do something. That was my first thought when I read that. I'm like, you can't fervently not do something.
But, the other problem is that they don't really know anything about the outside to worship it. So, they can't really reject it, which is what is trying to be said.
Right.
Right. They can fear it. They could say they worshipped everything within their microcosm of the world just as fervently as they feared anything that lay outside it.
Yeah.
And we could, again, this is assuming that you want to reveal this much at all, but maybe this would be better served by having, one of the tribesmen who had been kicked out of his tribe and into a city had evinced a form of hysterical blindness where he refused to see anything because he didn't believe that anything could exist outside the world, and acknowledging
like
it would be
internet.
too terrifying.
Can't unsee.
Man, there have been times when I've wished I had hysterical blindness. At any rate,
Maybe next
yes.
time.
And then after that one, we have the payoff to the face sorry, I'm reading part of the text. We have the payoff to the end of the first paragraph, which is one tribe thought that the sun and moon shone only on the tribe lands, and every once in a while a poor untutored soul would wander in from the outside with 3 days' worth of food and water, a knife, and a dazzled look on their face like they were seeing the sun and moon for the first time. Problems with this sentence: at least one tribe who lived along the northern face of the labyrinth thought that the sun and moon shone only on the tribe lands. That's one thought. Every once in a while, a poor untutored soul would wander in from the outside with 3 days' worth of food and the water and a knife and blah, blah, blah. That's completely separate. There's no reason to link those two thoughts with a conjunction.
Yeah.
They should be...
I'd actually break it up into a separate paragraph entirely.
Yeah. I think...
Yeah.
I think that's probably the way I would go with it, too. And I'm
Also,
not quite sure why they would have a dazzled look on their face like they were seeing the sun and moon for the first time.
Yeah. They might be afraid that they ran across people, but I mean, they're in what's clearly you've set out as this is a dangerous situation to be in. I don't think they'd be like dumbstruck in awe. I think they'd, be tenaciously clinging to life, if anything.
Unless they're like, the city of El Dorado is what's in the middle of the tribe lands, and they wander in and they're like, oh my god, this is amazing. And the people are like, yes, welcome, come up here to the highest plateau.
Yeah.
No.
We'll show you how nice it looks from up here.
Stand real close to the edge. This is Sparta! Sorry.
The thing is, though...
It's movie reference day on Unsheathed.
If it is meant to be dazzled, there's nothing to dazzle us as a reader. So, sort of saying, oh, they're completely amazed. Either needs to sort of be, they sort of need to hang a lamp on that so, we know that there's something that we as readers are not seeing. Or alternately, they need to give us as readers something to be dazzled by.
Yeah, and again, there's a lack of sort of specificity here. It's everything's in general terms. Like he mentions this labyrinth here, just kind of out of nowhere, without any real introduction, and then doesn't pick up on it again. So I mean, if there is something, really like special and bedazzling, we need to be told what that is and why. As it is, we just sort of get like a random detail that seems to be thrown in there, as if it's supposed to be intriguing, but since it doesn't come from anything and then doesn't go anywhere, it just sort of is. And it makes me wonder, like, all right, why is that detail there if it's not doing anything?
Right.
Yeah. I have to admit, I'm amazed that Hirosaki spotted that, because I actually hadn't noticed the labyrinth. It was so random and so off to the side that it just sort of was invisible for me.
See, I am paying attention, Foos.
So, yeah. So I think, definitely Condrel can turn a phrase. I think this is something that I would view as like a first draft, where you've written down a bunch of stuff that kind of, it's not quite throwing darts at a board, but it's sort of like, I'm just going to write down a bunch of stuff that kind of says something near what I want to say, and then you'll want to look back and apply those turns of phrase, because when you read it, apart from some of the sentences being kind of long, you do want to break that up. But when you read it out loud, it does flow fairly well, and that's something that, in a lot of amateur prose you don't really see.
Yeah, like the language itself is technically competent, and the commas are all used properly and whatnot. So, I mean, that's not an issue.
A+ on comma use, Condrel.
Which, having read slush pile entries before, I can say that is not something to take for granted, that your author knows how to actually write.
Oh, and I just want to take a quick break in here to say, if you don't follow my live journal, there's an author who I follow who took to reading a slush pile and posted a beautiful, lovely rant on why your first paragraphs need to grab the reader right away. And just, go to my live journal. There's a recent entry from end of June, something like that, about why your first paragraph's important, and it links to her live journal, which is Yuki_ONNA, I think.
Yeah.
But she posts a lot, so it might be easier to find it through mine, and you should follow mine anyway. But yeah, reading slush piles opens your eyes to how difficult it is to really put a good story together.
Yeah.
If you don't have an access to your own slush pile, just go to FA and look at the recent story entries.
Because when it comes to slush pile stuff, I mean, you will, if you get 3 paragraphs into something, you can pretty much tell, is this worth my time to read or not?
Yeah.
And it'll be just okay, there's 12 more pages of this, but I'm done.
Right.
Next story.
Yeah, exactly. And then third, I think, was there anything else we wanted to talk about with the second paragraph?
No, other than to sort of reiterate how much this really needs to be there and how much can be brought out through action and scene and not through info dump summary.
Right. Fooz had one thing.
Yeah, something that bugs me about that last sentence, which doesn't come up when you read it because it's purely a typographical thing. Candrel uses parentheses to go around roundy brackets to go around a small phrase.
Oh, British people with your cute names for everything.
Is that what they call them in the UK? Roundy brackets.
I don't know. The full sentence is, the tribe would take them in, nurture them, teach them the stories of Father, Son, and Daughter Moon, then free their soul to fly with the stars, roundy bracket, who also shone only on the tribe lands, roundy bracket, by throwing them bodily from the top of the special plateau. Using parentheses like that is a little bit, it sort of breaks away from, normal structure of prose. I use it, but I use it for a specific effect. This is sort of, is it to a specific effect, or is it just randomly dropping it in there? This to me really feels a bit like the Douglas Adams thing.
I was just about to say the exact same thing. It feels very Douglas Adams-y.
Yeah, because Douglas Adams used parentheses like that a hell of a lot in Hitchhiker. So,
but when he did it, became kind of a stylistic thing. And I think the problem with it in here, and now that I look at it, I think you're right about it, is he drops it into the middle of a sentence that has a particular energetic progression. It's not like he's saying, I thought that, the sun and moon and shone only on the tribe lands, parentheses, the stars shone wherever they wanted. Yeah. It's not like a little appendix to a previous thought. It's, we're going to free their soul to fly with the stars. And again, here, the stars haven't even been mentioned before in this paragraph. He talks a lot about the sun and moon. So why not say, teach them the stories of Father, Son, and Daughter Moon, then free their soul to fly with the sun and moon, or, construct that around, but use the sun and moon. Why bring the stars in at all?
But also you could just use commas instead of brackets. It's really not that far, because the thing is, normally when you use parentheses, you use it for something that's completely aside from what you're saying. This is pretty in context with the rest of the sentence.
Yeah, it's not defying what's already being said. It's kind of within expectations, which doesn't really need a special call-out, or at least not a parenthetical call-out.
Right. So that, I agree with that as well. So then we have the last one, which I think we've already pretty much covered. There's not too much else to talk about there. If the outside world and inside tribes ever bothered to meet, they would agree on only one thing, and that would be that they should never meet again. Which is it again feels kind of punchliney.
Yeah,
but
it's like the only thing they have in common is that they have nothing in common.
Right.
Yeah,
It's almost too long though, because for it to be good, a good sort of punch, as it were, not necessarily punchline as in a punch like a joke, but something to sort of, really sort of underline what's gone ahead, what's gone previously. It could be shorter, it could be sharper.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels like they have met, kind of, because you've just gone through a whole paragraph about what happens when people from the outside come into the tribe lands.
Mm. And the people from the tribe lands clearly know what they think of people who come in. They have a whole ritual process of what they do with them.
Right.
So.
But this also brings to question, the perspective of the narrative, because while we're assuming it's third-person omniscient, it could be, sort of more from the perspective of the Outlanders or from the tribals. We don't necessarily have a clear expectation there.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that... any parting thoughts for Condrel?
One other thing, which is also another typographic thing that doesn't come up when you're just reading it out loud. Halfway through, the term tribelands goes from being uncapitalized to capitalized.
Ooh.
Yes, you definitely want to be consistent with that.
Consistent with your terminology. But
Also, you want otters to.
And once it switches, it stays switched. But for the first paragraph and a half, it's lowercase, and then suddenly it's all uppercase.
Yes, otters sometimes make good proofreaders.
Yeah,
when they can keep their attention focused.
Squirrel! I don't think otters would be very interested in going after squirrels unless they were really slutty. I don't know.
So...
Sorry.
You just wrote a whole story about a squirrel who was pretty slutty.
There's no otters in it, though.
That's too bad. I think.
The otters are implied.
Yeah, probably, actually.
So, we're going to, in the interest of kind of keeping this to a reasonable length, I think we did go through and hopefully gave some helpful feedback to Condrel. And, again, I want to say the thoughts in here, there's a lot of cool ideas. There's probably, I think, too many cool ideas, and you need to pare it down to the ones that are most important to the reader and make sure you're consistent with how you're presenting them. But you certainly, Condrel, you can certainly construct the phrases well enough. I think it's just a matter of making sure that in a couple cases you're using the right word. In another few cases, that you're given the correct information and that, you stay consistent with what you're telling the reader. But overall, I'd be real interested to hear what you do with our feedback on this. Yeah,
and, on the subject, if you have some good ideas, I'm going to, again, reiterate my suggestion. Save some of your cool ideas for actual scenes in the story and not just, one-off lines that the reader will parse over and then might not even have it stick with them. If you can actually take something and put it into part of what's happening, then, that will, make a more interesting impression on the people who are reading it.
Yeah, I think an important thing, though, is to remember to keep focus on, each paragraph here is devoted to too many things. You sort of need to sort of think of language as you've got a word, and that conveys something. And if you need to convey something more complex, you need to use a sentence. And if you need to convey something more complex than that, you need to use a paragraph. But you still need to be conveying one thing. And a lot of these paragraphs are sort of hopping all over the place, and, there needs to be a lot more focus.
Right. And I remember from high school English class when we were being taught how to write essays, that an essay was constructed by, you would introduce your topic in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
And then the first paragraph essentially is telling the reader, this is what the essay is going to be about. And then each paragraph was, here's the first sentence is, here's the first thought, and then either here's the background for it, here's the support for it, or here's where I'm progressing with it. And then when you move to a new thought, you move to a new paragraph.
And that's completely the wrong way to write prose. You can't write prose like that at all. And I see what you mean, because Condrel's doing that.
You can't, but you can't. you're affecting me with your evil British accent, curse y'all.
It's not even really a British accent, you
No,
know?
no, that's true.
Wow, you
I
just
have to
went
say-
like New Jersey there.
I have to say grits.
Dude.
I have to say grits a few times now.
Grits.
Get it back.
Grits.
But
Y'all had your grits?
you cannot write prose that structurally, but it does help when you're writing it to say, okay, you know, this paragraph has gone from being a geographical description of what happens with people inside the tribe lands and, you know, where they live, to this whole bizarre ritual. Well, that ritual maybe needs to be in its own paragraph.
Yeah.
It needs to be set off. So, in a sense, I'm, you know, again, that was high school English class, but the guidelines, I think, holds true. And it's in line with what you said, which is, you know, a word conveys one thing, a group of words in a sentence conveys a more complete thought, a paragraph expands on that thought.
And a picture is 1,000 words.
Yes. And a paragraph is half a picture.
Yes.
Got to be a real long paragraph.
But, all right, so we're going to leave it there. I want to really thank Condrel for putting himself out there and exposing himself to the hacksaw and the sharp teeth and whatnots. And
Yeah, I just want to point out that this is what we can do with 3 paragraphs. So with that in mind, how many of you out there still really want to write a novel?
What's worse is that you've got to do this to yourself
Yeah.
while you're writing.
Yeah, exactly right. I was just going to say, this is, you know, us going over 3 paragraphs. You need to be able to do this to your own prose, and you need to be able to do it
To the whole thing.
to the whole thing. So, good luck.
This is when people are like, hey, Hirosaki, how come you haven't written a novel? Well, you know what? It's not as simple as I'll write a novel.
Right,
And I did. I just haven't finished it yet.
right. You finished a second draft.
Well, draft 1.5.
Second draft.
Because foozzzball didn't like draft 0.5 enough.
You're not a piece of software. You can't do mid versions and think it counts for something.
It was a complete draft of what I was trying to write at the time.
Yes.
And then I said,
then
that
it's
wasn't
draft
long enough.
1.0. And then this revision is draft 2.0.
Okay, fine.
All right.
Now you're making Kid angry.
I know. Kit's over in the corner threatening me with all kinds of stuff. All right.
Omer.
And you don't get to
I better,
watch.
I better leave before my Kinsey scale breaks.
That old thing. You need to get an updated one.
You know,
Okay.
now, like, instead of having, like, the, you know, the disappointing Price is Right horns, we can have, like, the disappointing Vuvuzela.
That's the sound everybody but Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and Uruguay is making right now.
Pretty much.
All right. I will wrap up.
For 90 minutes.
Foozzzball, you can find his Cersei series and his prose and all kinds of other wonderful, valuable stuff on Fur Affinity.
F-double-O triple Z.
F-double-O triple Z. Ball.
Ball.
You can find KM Hirosaki's Otter Ramblings at KM Hirosaki, Hirosaki, on Fur Affinity.
Yes. There's an underscore in there. But if you
Is
just
it?
go to... there's an
It's
underscore
not
in the
between
username.
the hero and the Saki, right?
No, it's between the KM. Wait. If you actually just type in the URL, like /user/KM Hirosaki, it's all one word. But my username has a underscore in it.
Right. And I am just Kyell on Fur Affinity. And we are all on Twitter under those same names, except that mine is Kyell Gold. Send us mail at unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com. If you would like us, we don't promise that we'll do another editing show, but this one was kind of fun, so
Yeah.
we might consider it.
In the future.
Always a good excuse to get our Hacksaw Rat on the phone.
Oh, and we have a
Indeed.
new user icon now.
Oh, and we have a user
That was done by
courtesy,
Cirrus.
courtesy of Cirrus,
Yes,
who's
that's CIRRUS.
like the cloud,
Yes.
who is quite lovely, and KM Hirosaki looks wonderfully flustered in it.
Like, 8 people called that out across all
it's
the
so
different
adorable.
places it was posted. I was just like, oh my god, is that really where everyone goes to when they look at me?
In that picture, because you do.
I'm exempt. I'm exempt.
No, you're
And
not.
I look scheming.
Why are you exempt, Foos?
Because when I look at that picture, I just go, thank God he's not looking at me.
Fair enough.
It's Cam Hirasaki's, oh, I have no pants on, look.
No, my I have no pants on look is very different.
I don't know. It depends who you're looking at. Thank you all for listening. Before Kit comes over and...
Oh, wait, should I shill for New Fables?
Sure. Actually, we could chill for New Fables and cupcakes real quick. Oh, Kit's sighing.
Yeah.
All right, do your New Fables shill, and I'll do the cupcakes, and then we will bid everyone a good night.
Okay, everybody has to go out and buy New Fables #4 from Sofa Wolf Press, because I've got the first story in the anthology called War Dog, which is really cool, so you all have to buy it.
War Dog is a really cool story.
It is a very cool story.
I like it a
I can
lot.
vouch for that.
Yeah, I can vouch for it too.
And our second cupcake came out at Anthrocon by Rikoshi. It's called The Peculiar Quandary of Simon Canopus Artile, in addition to Changes for the Better, which is the second story in it. You should go buy that. And we will have a third cupcake coming out later this year by our Hacksaw
Me.
Rat,
Yes.
which is called...
The 12th Jackie, or alternately, the dozenth Jackie. I'm still trying to make up my mind.
Oh, I think you need 12th. Doesn't scan well.
No, that sounds like
12.
something like kind of a Doctor Who title. You're laughing because you know
Yeah.
I'm right.
Yes. Okay, so it'll be the 12th Jackie.
And I will just give you... We're still working on the pitch line for it, but I will give you one pitch line, or one sentence. What makes you unique when you have 167 identical sisters?
Mm-hmm.
That's
rough.
That's our one sentence. Yes, and you did it to her.
My bad.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Foos, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And good night, everyone, and keep writing.